Why smart people learn to be alone. There's a strange fear that follows many people through life. It doesn't announce itself loudly. It hides beneath busy schedules, endless conversations, crowded rooms, constant notifications, and the endless need to stay connected. Most people call it loneliness, but what they are actually afraid of is something much deeper. They are afraid of being alone with themselves. Think about it. When was the last time you sat in complete silence? No phone, no music, no television, no conversation, no distractions, just you and your own thoughts. For many people, even imagining that feels uncomfortable. The moment silence appears, they reach for something. Anything. A screen, a message, a podcast, a task, a distraction. Not because they need information, not because they need entertainment, but because they're trying to escape the one person they can never truly leave behind. Themselves. This is one of the great paradoxes of modern life. We are more connected than any generation in human history. We can talk to someone on the other side of the world instantly. We can share our thoughts with thousands of people in seconds. We can fill every moment of our day with noise and stimulation. Yet anxiety is rising. Depression is rising. Stress is rising. People feel more disconnected than ever before. Why? Because connection is not the same thing as peace. And noise is not the same thing as fulfillment. The Stoics understood something thousands of years ago that modern society is only beginning to rediscover. A person who cannot be alone will never be truly free. Marcus Aurelius understood this. Despite ruling one of the most powerful empires in history, he constantly sought solitude. Imagine that. The most powerful man in the known world, surrounded by soldiers, advisors, politicians, citizens, family, responsibilities. Yet he repeatedly withdrew into quiet reflection. Not because he hated people, not because he was antisocial, but because he understood a truth that many people never learn. The quality of your life depends on the quality of your relationship with your own mind. And that relationship can only be built in solitude. Today, society often treats being alone as a problem. If someone spends too much time alone, people become concerned. If someone enjoys solitude, others assume they must be lonely. If someone chooses peace over constant social activity, they are sometimes viewed as strange. But the wisest people throughout history often sought solitude deliberately. Not because they rejected humanity, but solitude allowed them to understand humanity more clearly. Think about the greatest philosophers, the greatest inventors, the greatest artists, the greatest thinkers. Many of their most important insights emerged during periods of isolation. Not in crowds, not during endless meetings, not while scrolling through endless information, but during moments of stillness. Moments when they were finally able to hear themselves think. This is what modern life quietly steals from us. The ability to think deeply. The ability to reflect. The ability to understand ourselves. Every day, we are bombarded by opinions, news, arguments, advertisements, expectations, social pressures. Everyone is telling us what to think, what to buy, what to fear, what success should look like, what happiness should look like, what our lives should become. And when we are constantly surrounded by those voices, something dangerous happens. We lose our own. The Stoics warned about this. Epictetus taught that if you want to improve, you must be willing to be seen as foolish by others. That sounds simple, but think about how difficult it really is. Most people are controlled by the opinions of others. They dress for approval, speak for approval, work for approval, post for approval, live for approval, and approval is a prison. Because the moment your happiness depends on external validation, your peace belongs to someone else. The Stoics understood that freedom begins when your sense of worth comes from within. But discovering that inner foundation requires solitude. You cannot hear your own values when you're constantly surrounded by noise. You cannot understand your own desires when you're constantly chasing everyone else's expectations. You cannot discover who you are if you're always performing for an audience. This is why smart people often appear distant, not because they dislike others, not because they think they're superior, but because they understand the value of protecting their mental space. They understand that every conversation influences thought, every environment influences emotion, every relationship influences behavior. And if you're not careful, the world will slowly shape you into someone you never intended to become. Marcus Aurelius wrote that people seek retreats in the countryside, by the sea, or in the mountains. Yet they always have the power to retreat into themselves. Think about that. The greatest refuge is not a location. It is a state of mind, a place within yourself where clarity exists, where noise cannot reach, where external chaos loses its power. Most people never discover that place because they are too busy running from it. They mistake solitude for suffering. But solitude and loneliness are not the same thing. Loneliness is the pain of feeling disconnected. Solitude is the joy of being connected to yourself. Loneliness says, I need someone to complete me. Solitude says, I'm already whole. Loneliness feels empty. Solitude feels full. Loneliness weakens. Solitude strengthens. The difference is not whether you're physically alone. The difference is the relationship you have with yourself. And this is where the modern world struggles. Because most people were never taught how to be alone. They were taught how to be productive, how to compete, how to achieve, how to consume, how to entertain themselves, but not how to sit quietly with their own thoughts. As a result, silence becomes uncomfortable. Stillness becomes threatening, and solitude feels unbearable. Yet the Stoics viewed solitude differently. To them, solitude was a training ground, a place where character was forged, a place where wisdom emerged, a place where emotional independence was cultivated. Because when you're alone, something interesting happens. All distractions disappear. There is nobody to impress, nobody to blame, nobody to entertain, nobody to validate you. There is only you, and that's where the real work begins. You begin to notice your fears, your insecurities, your habits, your emotional patterns, your hidden motivations. Things that remain invisible in constant activity suddenly become impossible to ignore. And many people ran away at that moment. They rushed back into distraction, back into noise, back into busyness, because self-awareness can be uncomfortable. But growth always begins with awareness. The Stoics never promised comfort. They promised freedom. And freedom often requires confronting truths we'd rather avoid. Perhaps that's why smart people learn to be alone, because they understand something most people never realize. The greatest battle you'll ever fight isn't against the world. It's against your own mind. The world can challenge you, but your thoughts determine whether those challenges destroy you or strengthen you. The world can reject you, but your self-worth determines whether that rejection defines you. The world can create obstacles, but your mindset determines whether those obstacles become prisons or opportunities. And the only place to develop that mindset is in solitude, because solitude strips away illusions. It reveals reality. It reveals who you are when nobody is watching, who you are when nobody is applauding, who you are when nobody is judging, who you are when nobody expects anything from you. And that person matters more than anyone else you'll ever meet, because you'll spend every moment of your life with them. The Stoics knew this. That's why they practiced reflection, journaling, meditation, silence, contemplation, not as escapes from reality, but as a way of seeing reality more clearly. They understood that inner strength isn't built in crowds. It's built in quiet moments. Moments when nobody sees the work you're doing. Moments when you're learning to master your emotions. Moments when you're learning to think independently. Moments when you're learning to stand on your own. And perhaps that's the real reason smart people learn to be alone. Not because they need less connection, but because they understand the difference between connection and dependence. They enjoy relationships, but they don't need relationships to feel complete. They appreciate companionship, but they don't fear solitude. They love deeply, but they don't lose themselves. because they have already built something most people spend their entire lives searching for: a home within themselves. And once you discover that home, everything changes. Because when you're comfortable alone, you stop settling for relationships that drain you. You stop chasing validation. You stop fearing rejection. You stop compromising your values to fit in. You stop running from silence. And you begin to experience a kind of freedom that cannot be taken away. The freedom of self-possession. The freedom of inner peace. The freedom of knowing that no matter what happens outside of you, there's a place within you that remains steady. That is the Stoic path. And it begins with learning how to be alone. Not lonely. Alone. Because there's a profound difference. An understanding that difference may change your entire life. Why modern society fears solitude. There was a time when silence was normal. People walked without headphones. They sat on porches watching the sunset. They worked with their hands and spent long stretches of time alone with their thoughts. Moments of quiet weren't considered strange. They were simply part of life. Today, silence has become almost extinct. The moment a line gets too long, we pull out our phones. The moment a room becomes quiet, someone turns on a screen. The moment boredom appears, we rush to eliminate it. We live in a world that treats silence like a problem to be solved. And because of that, many people have forgotten how to be alone. This didn't happen by accident. Entire industries are built around capturing your attention. Every notification, every advertisement, every recommendation, every endless scroll competes for one thing: your awareness. Because attention has become one of the most valuable resources on earth. The longer you stay distracted, the more profitable you become. The Stoics never faced smartphones. They never dealt with social media. They never experienced 24-hour news cycles. Yet they understood the danger perfectly. Because the enemy was never technology. The enemy was a distraction. The enemy was allowing outside forces to control your inner world. And that danger exists today more than ever. Most people wake up and immediately expose their minds to hundreds of outside influences, before they've even had a chance to hear their own thoughts, before they've asked themselves what matters, before they've connected with their own values. Someone else's voice enters first. The news, social media, messages, emails, notifications, opinions, expectations, demands, and slowly, without realizing it, they begin living reactively instead of intentionally. This creates a subtle but powerful problem. People become strangers to themselves. They know what everyone else thinks. They know what's trending. They know what celebrities believe. They know what strangers on the internet are arguing about. But they don't know themselves. They don't know what they genuinely value. They don't know what they truly want. They don't know what kind of life would actually satisfy them. Because self-knowledge requires solitude. And solitude has become increasingly rare. Imagine spending years listening to everyone else's voice while ignoring your own. Eventually, your own voice becomes difficult to recognize. This is one reason modern people fear being alone. Because when external noise disappears, internal noise becomes impossible to ignore. Suddenly, there are questions waiting. Questions that have been buried beneath activity. Questions like, am I actually happy? Why do I keep repeating the same mistakes? Why am I exhausted all the time? Why do I need constant validation? What am I afraid of? What am I avoiding? What kind of person am I becoming? These questions are uncomfortable, but discomfort is not a danger. The Stoics understood that some discomfort is necessary. In fact, growth often begins exactly where comfort ends. Marcus Aurelius frequently reminded himself to face reality as it is, not as he wished it to be. That's what solitude forces us to do. When the distractions disappear, reality remains. And reality can be unsettling, not because it's cruel, but because it's honest. Many people spend years constructing identities based on external approval. They become a successful employee, the perfect parent, the popular friend, the reliable provider, the entertaining personality, the achiever, the people pleaser, the helper, the victim, the hero. They wear these identities for so long that they mistake them for who they are. But solitude asks a dangerous question. Who are you when none of those roles exist? Who are you when nobody needs anything from you? Who are you when nobody is watching? Who are you when nobody is impressed? That question terrifies many people, because beneath their roles, they discover uncertainty. And uncertainty feels uncomfortable. Yet uncertainty is often the beginning of wisdom. Socrates became famous not because he claimed to know everything. He became famous because he recognized how much he didn't know. His wisdom began with humility. His wisdom began with honesty. And honesty requires solitude. You cannot honestly examine yourself while constantly performing for others. You cannot deeply understand yourself while endlessly comparing yourself to everyone around you. Comparison is another reason modern society fears solitude. We live in an age where people constantly measure their lives against carefully edited versions of other people's realities. Every day, they see images of success, luxury, beauty, achievement, popularity, and they begin to feel inadequate, not because their lives are inadequate, but because comparison creates endless dissatisfaction. The Stoics would have recognized this trap immediately. Comparison keeps your attention focused outward. Wisdom directs attention inward. The Stoic asks, am I becoming wiser? Am I becoming more disciplined? Am I becoming more courageous? Am I becoming more just? The modern mind often asks, am I ahead of everyone else? Do people admire me? Am I successful enough? Am I attractive enough? Am I important enough? Notice the difference. One path leads towards self-mastery. The other leads toward endless insecurity. And solitude helps reveal which path you're walking. Because when you're alone, comparison loses its power. There is no audience. There is no competition. There is no performance. There is only reality. And reality is often simpler than we imagine. Many of our worries exist only because we're imagining how other people see us. Many of our fears exist only because we're seeking approval. Many of our anxieties exist only because we're trying to control things beyond our control. Epictetus taught that freedom begins when we focus only on what belongs to us. Our thoughts, our choices, our actions, our character. Everything else is secondary. But that lesson is difficult to hear in a noisy world, because noise constantly encourages us to focus on things outside ourselves. Popularity, status, recognition, reputation, possessions, achievements. None of these is entirely under our control, and yet many people build their entire identities around them. Then they wonder why they feel anxious. The Stoics knew why. Anything that can be taken away cannot be the foundation of peace. True peace requires something deeper, something internal, something stable, and that stability is discovered through solitude. Not overnight, not through one meditation session, not through one quiet evening, but through repeated encounters with yourself, through learning to sit with your thoughts without immediately escaping them, through learning to face your emotions without running, through learning to observe your mind without becoming controlled by it. This is where modern society becomes uncomfortable, because most people have been trained to seek stimulation. Constant stimulation, Faststimulation, immediate stimulation. The mind becomes addicted to novelty, and solitude offers the opposite. It offers stillness. It offers patience. It offers observation. At first, this feels boring, then uncomfortable, then frustrating, but eventually something changes. You begin noticing things, patterns, habits, beliefs, emotional triggers, fears, dreams, insights. The noise begins to settle. The mind begins to clear. And underneath all the distraction, something powerful emerges. Clarity. This is why intelligent people often become protective of their solitude. Not because they dislike people, not because they reject relationships, but because they understand the value of mental clarity. They know that every great decision requires thought. Every meaningful transformation requires reflection. Every deep understanding requires stillness. And stillness cannot survive in constant noise. Carl Jung understood this deeply. He observed that people often spend their lives avoiding themselves. They stay busy, stay distracted, stay entertained, because they're afraid of what they might discover if they stop. Yet the things we avoid often control us. The fears we refuse to examine, the wounds we refuse to acknowledge, the insecurities we refuse to confront, they continue operating beneath the surface, influencing our decisions, shaping our behavior, directing our lives. And we call it fate. But it isn't fate. It's unconsciousness. The Stoics sought awareness. They wanted to see clearly, even when clarity was uncomfortable, especially when clarity was uncomfortable, because they understood a simple truth. You cannot change what you refuse to see. Solitude allows you to see. It acts like a mirror, and not everyone likes what they find in that mirror. But the purpose isn't self-criticism. The purpose is self-understanding, because understanding creates freedom. The moment you understand a fear, it begins losing power. The moment you understand a habit, you gain the ability to change it. The moment you understand yourself, you stop being controlled by unconscious patterns. This is why solitude matters. Not because isolation is virtuous, not because people are unimportant, but because self-awareness is impossible without periods of aloneness. And without self-awareness, life becomes automatic, reactive, predictable, unconscious. The modern world fears solitude because solitude exposes reality. It removes distractions. It removes excuses. It removes performances. And what's left is truth. The Stoics didn't fear that truth. They welcomed it, because they knew that truth, even when uncomfortable, always serves freedom better than illusion. And perhaps that's the lesson modern society needs most. To stop treating solitude like a punishment. To stop treating silence like an enemy. To stop treating stillness like a waste of time. Because the very thing many people are running from may be the thing they need most. Not more noise. Not more stimulation. No more distractions. But a quiet moment alone. A moment long enough to hear themselves again. A moment long enough to remember who they are beneath the expectations. Beneath the roles. Beneath the performance. A moment long enough to discover that solitude is not emptiness. It is the place where wisdom begins. The difference between loneliness and solitude. The secret most people never learn. One of the greatest misunderstandings in modern life is the belief that being alone automatically means being lonely. It doesn't. In fact, some of the loneliest people in the world are surrounded by others every single day. They sit in crowded offices. They attend busy social gatherings. They share homes with partners. They scroll through endless conversations. They receive messages constantly. Yet beneath all of that activity is an uncomfortable emptiness. A feeling that no one truly understands them. A feeling that something is missing. A feeling of disconnection. That feeling is loneliness. And loneliness has very little to do with physical isolation. Loneliness is not the absence of people. It's the absence of meaningful connection. You could be surrounded by hundreds of people and still feel completely alone. At the same time, you can spend an entire day by yourself and feel deeply fulfilled. This is the difference most people never learn. Solitude and loneliness are not opposites. They are entirely different experiences. Loneliness says, I need someone. Solitude says, I have myself. Loneliness feels like a lack. Solitude feels like abundance. Loneliness creates desperation. Solitude creates freedom. The Stoics understood this distinction with remarkable clarity. They knew that a person who depends entirely on others for emotional stability will always live in fear. Fear of rejection, fear of abandonment, fear of criticism, fear of being misunderstood, fear of being alone. And fear makes people easy to control. Think about how many poor decisions are made because people are afraid of being alone. They stay in relationships that hurt them. They tolerate disrespect. They remain in toxic friendships. They chase approval from people who don't value them. They abandon their principles. They silence their opinions. They sacrifice their authenticity. all because solitude feels frightening. But what if solitude isn't frightening? What if solitude is actually one of the greatest sources of strength available to a human being? This is where the Stoic perspective becomes revolutionary. Marcus Aurelius spent years leading armies, managing crises, facing betrayal, enduring personal loss, and carrying the weight of an empire. Yet his writings reveal something extraordinary. Again and again, he returned inward. Again and again, he sought refuge within himself. He wasn't searching for escape. He was searching for clarity, because he understood something profound. If your peace depends entirely on other people, then your peace is fragile. The moment they leave, your peace leaves with them. The moment they change, your stability changes. The moment they disappoint you, your emotional world collapses. That is not freedom. That is dependency. And dependency creates suffering. Modern culture often disguises dependency as love. It tells us we need someone to complete us, someone to fix us, someone to validate us, someone to make us happy. But the Stoics would challenge that idea immediately. How can another person complete you if you don't understand yourself? How can another person create peace within you if you have never learned to create it yourself? How can another person become your foundation when they themselves are imperfect and temporary? The Stoics weren't against love. Far from it. They valued friendship deeply. They valued family deeply. They valued community deeply. But they believed those relationships should enhance an already stable life, not become the sole source of stability. This is a crucial distinction. When you learn to enjoy solitude, relationships become healthier. You stop clinging. You stop controlling. You stop demanding. You stop turning other people into emotional lifeboats. Instead, you choose relationships from a place of wholeness. You connect because you want to, not because you're terrified of being alone. And people can feel the difference. A person comfortable with solitude carries a different energy. They don't chase. They don't beg. They don't manipulate. They don't desperately seek attention. They are present, calm, grounded, authentic, and ironically, that often makes them more attractive to others. Not because they're trying to attract anyone, but confidence naturally grows from self-sufficiency. This doesn't mean becoming emotionally distant. It doesn't mean becoming cold. It doesn't mean rejecting human connection. True solitude is not isolation. It is self-possession, the ability to remain connected to yourself regardless of who enters or leaves your life. Imagine a tree with deep roots. Storm scolme. Winds blow. Seasons change. Branches bend. Leaves fall. Yet the tree remains standing. Why? Because its stability comes from beneath the surface, not from external conditions. The Stoics wanted people to develop those roots internally, so that praise would not inflate them. Criticism would not destroy them. Success would not define them. Failure would not break them. And solitude is where those roots grow, because solitude teaches you something essential. You survive it. The fear of being alone is often much worse than the reality. People imagine emptiness, sadness, isolation. But when they finally spend time alone intentionally, they often discover something unexpected. Relief. No performance. No expectations. No comparisons. No social pressure. No need to explain themselves. Just space. Space to think. Space to breathe. Space to reconnect. Space to remember who they are. This is why many people experience profound personal growth during periods of solitude. Not because solitude magically solves problems, but because it removes distractions. Without constant noise, patterns become visible. Without constant stimulation, thoughts become clearer. Without constant validation, self-worth begins to develop internally. This process can feel uncomfortable at first. In fact, it usually does. The first thing solitude often reveals is not peace. It's chaos. Thoughts you've been avoiding, feelings you've been suppressing, questions you've been postponing, regrets you've been carrying, fears you've been hiding. All of it rises to the surface. And many people mistake this for failure. They think solitude is making them worse. But that's not what's happening. The storm was already there. Solitude simply made it visible. The Stoics understood that awareness precedes improvement. You cannot heal what you refuse to acknowledge. You cannot change what you refuse to see. And solitude gives you the opportunity to see clearly. Carl Jung described this process as confronting the shadow, the hidden aspects of ourselves we would rather ignore, the insecurities, the resentments, the fears, the contradictions, the unresolved wounds. Most people spend years running from these things. But wherever you run, you take yourself with you. Eventually, the only path forward is through, and solitude creates the conditions for that journey. This is why intelligent people often value time alone, not because they have all the answers, but because they're willing to face the questions. They understand that growth requires reflection, and reflection requires space. A constantly distracted mind cannot deeply examine itself. It can only react, respond, consume, repeat. But wisdom emerges when reaction slows down, when observation begins, when silence becomes a teacher instead of an enemy. Seneca once wrote that a person should learn to be their own companion. Think about that. Your own companion, not your own critic, not your own enemy, not your own source of punishment. Your companion, someone whose presence you genuinely enjoy, someone whose company brings peace rather than stress, someone you trust, someone you respect. For many people, this idea feels foreign because they spent years criticizing themselves, judging themselves, comparing themselves, attacking themselves, and then wondering why solitude feels uncomfortable. Of course it does. If your inner dialogue is hostile, being alone becomes exhausting. The solution is not to avoid solitude. The solution is to transform the relationship you have with yourself, to become someone whose company you actually enjoy, to cultivate self-respect, self-awareness, self-compassion, self-discipline. Because when those qualities develop, solitude changes completely. It stops feeling empty. It starts feeling rich. It stops feeling like deprivation. It starts feeling like freedom. And that freedom affects every area of life. You become less dependent on external validation, less reactive to criticism, less desperate for approval, less afraid of rejection, because you've discovered something many people spend their entire lives seeking, a sense of home within yourself. And once you've found that home, you carry it everywhere, into relationships, into challenges, into uncertainty, into success, into failure, into every season of life. The Stoics knew that external circumstances constantly change. People come and go. Opportunities appear and disappear. Fortunes rise and fall. Nothing remains the same forever. But the person who has learned to enjoy solitude possesses something stable, something durable, something that cannot easily be taken away. Inner companionship, inner peace, inner strength. This is why smart people learn to be alone, not because they reject others, but because they refuse to lose themselves. They understand that the healthiest relationships are built between two whole people, not two people desperately trying to fill each other's emptiness. They understand that solitude is not the absence of connection. It is the foundation of authentic connection. Because when you no longer fear being alone, you stop settling for relationships that make you feel lonely. And that may be one of the most liberating discoveries a person can ever make. You do not need to fear solitude. You need to learn its language. Because hidden within that silence is a strength most people never discover. And once you hear it, your life will never feel the same again. Why smart people stop chasing validation? The Stoic path to inner freedom. There is an invisible addiction that controls millions of lives. Most people never recognize it. They don't see it because society rewards it, encourages it, even celebrates it. Yet beneath countless decisions, arguments, insecurities, and disappointments lies the same hidden force. The need for validation. The need to be approved of, to be admired, to be accepted, to be praised, to be seen as important. At first glance, this seems harmless. After all, everyone wants to be liked. Everyone enjoys recognition. Everyone appreciates encouragement. The problem begins when approval becomes a necessity instead of a bonus. Because the moment your self-worth depends on someone else's opinion, you've handed over your freedom. The Stoics understood this deeply. And nowhere is this lesson more important than in the modern world. Today, validation is available in endless quantities. Likes, comments, followers, views, shares, reactions, notifications, tiny digital signals that whisper the same message. You matter, at least for a moment, but the relief never lasts. The satisfaction fades quickly. Then the mind wants more. More attention, more recognition, more approval. And so begins a cycle that never truly ends. Because external validation is like drinking salt water. The more you consume, the thirstier you become. Marcus Aurelius ruled the most powerful empire on earth. His decisions affected millions. His reputation spread across continents. If anyone had reason to care about public opinion, it was him. Yet again and again, his writings return to the same idea. Other people's opinions are not your concern. Your concern is your character. Think about how radical that is. Most people spend enormous amounts of energy managing appearances, trying to look successful, trying to look confident, trying to look happy, trying to look intelligent, trying to look important. The Stoics focused on something entirely different, actually becoming those things. Because appearance belongs to others, character belongs to you, and character remains when appearances disappear. Imagine two people. The first spends their life trying to impress others. The second spends their life trying to improve themselves. At first, they may look similar. Both work hard. Both pursue goals. Both seek growth. But their motivations are completely different. One is driven by applause. The other is driven by purpose. One rises when praised and collapses when criticized. The other remains steady regardless of external reactions. One lives for approval. The other lives for alignment with their values. And over time, those paths lead to very different destinations. The person addicted to validation never feels secure, because approval can always be withdrawn. Today's praise becomes tomorrow's criticism. Today's popularity becomes tomorrow's obscurity. Today's success becomes tomorrow's expectation. Nothing external stays permanent. And deep down, they know it. That's why they keep chasing, keep proving, keep performing, keep exhausting themselves. The Stoics wanted something better, something stable, something that could not be taken away by changing opinions. They wanted self-respect, because self-respect is different from validation. Validation asks, do they approve of me? Self-respect asks, am I living according to my principles? Validation depends on others. Self-respect depends on you. Validation fluctuates. Self-respect endures. Validation creates anxiety. Self-respect creates peace. The difference changes everything. Most people fear criticism because criticism threatens their identity. If your worth depends on being liked, criticism feels dangerous. If your worth depends on appearing competent, mistakes feel devastating. If your worth depends on admiration, rejection feels unbearable. But when your worth comes from character, criticism becomes information rather than destruction. This is one reason solitude is so important. Solitude removes the audience. And without an audience, something interesting happens. You begin discovering who you are when nobody is watching. No performance, no image management, no reputation concerns. Just reality, the real you. The Stoics considered this essential. Because a person who only behaves well when observed is not truly disciplined. A person who only acts courageously when praised is not truly courageous. A person who only does the right thing when rewarded is not truly virtuous. Real character exists even in private, especially in private. This is why solitude becomes a training ground for freedom. Every moment spent alone offers an opportunity to practice self-approval. Not arrogance, not self-obsession, self-approval. The quiet confidence that comes from knowing you're acting in accordance with your values, whether anyone notices or not. Think about how much energy people spend trying to control how they're perceived. choosing words carefully, avoiding disagreement, hiding flaws, seeking acceptance, managing impressions. It is exhausting because perception is ultimately uncontrollable. No matter what you do, someone will misunderstand you. Someone will criticize you. Someone will dislike you. Someone will judge you unfairly. Marcus Aurelius understood this reality. He knew that even emperors are criticized. Even wise people are misunderstood. Even good intentions are questioned. So he asked a simple question. If criticism is inevitable, why organize your life around avoiding it? Why surrender your authenticity to satisfy people who may never be satisfied? Why abandon your values for temporary approval? The answer is fear. Fear of rejection, fear of exclusion, fear of disapproval, fear of standing alone. These fears are ancient. They evolved when survival depended on belonging to a tribe. Being rejected once carried enormous consequences. But modern life is different. Most of the rejection people fear today threatens their ego, not their survival. And yet the emotional reaction remains powerful. That's why learning solitude matters. Because solitude teaches you that being alone is survivable. More than survivable. Sometimes it is transformative. The more comfortable you become with your own company, the less desperate you become for everyone else's approval. You stop saying yes when you mean no. You stop pretending to agree. You stop hiding your values. You stop shaping your identity around other people's expectations. And a strange thing happens. Your confidence grows. Not loud confidence. Not arrogant confidence. Quiet confidence. The kind that doesn't need to prove itself. The kind that doesn't seek attention. The kind that doesn't collapse under criticism. The Stoics valued this form of confidence because it comes from reality. Not an illusion. Not performance. Reality. You know your strengths. You know your weaknesses. You know your principles. You know your intentions. And because you know yourself, outside opinions lose some of their power. This doesn't mean you ignore feedback. Wisdom requires humility. Constructive criticism can be valuable. But there's a difference between learning from feedback and being controlled by it. One strengthens you. The other enslaves you. Epictetus taught that if someone speaks badly of you, remember that they only know a portion of your flaws. If they knew everything, they would have even more to criticize. At first, this sounds humorous, but beneath the humor is profound wisdom. Why become devastated by criticism when imperfection is already part of being human? Why spend your life protecting an image that was never real to begin with? The Stoics weren't trying to become flawless. They were trying to become honest. And honesty is liberating. Because once you stop pretending to be perfect, you stop fearing exposure. You stop fearing mistakes. You stop fearing judgment. You stop fearing rejection. You become more authentic, more relaxed, more resilient. And authenticity creates a different kind of strength. A strength that doesn't depend on applause. A strength that remains even when nobody notices. This is what smart people eventually learn. Approval feels good, but freedom feels better. Recognition is pleasant, but self-respect is priceless. Praise is enjoyable, but inner peace is far more valuable. The person who learns this becomes difficult to manipulate. Manipulation often relies on validation. Offer approval, threaten rejection, promise acceptance, create insecurity, control behavior. The Stoics refused to participate in this game. Their goal was not popularity. Their goal was integrity. And integrity often requires standing alone, speaking unpopular truths, making difficult choices, following principles that others don't understand, doing what is right instead of what is rewarded. This is where solitude becomes a source of power. Because every hour spent developing a stronger relationship with yourself reduces dependence on external approval. Every moment of honest reflection strengthens your internal foundation. Every act of self-respect makes outside validation less necessary. Eventually, something remarkable happens. You stop asking, "What will they think?" and start asking, "What do I believe?" You stop asking, "Will they approve?" and start asking, "Is this right?" You stop asking, How do I look? And start asking, who am I becoming? Those questions lead to a different life, a calmer life, a freer life, a more authentic life. Because the strongest people are not those who receive the most approval. They're those who need it the least. Not because they don't care about others, but because they care more about truth than applause, more about character than reputation, more about purpose than popularity. And that shift changes everything. Because once your worth comes from within, the world loses its ability to define you. Criticism becomes manageable. Rejection becomes survivable. Failure becomes educational. Success becomes enjoyable rather than necessary. And solitude stops feeling like emptiness. It becomes a place of renewal, a place where self-respect grows stronger, a place where identity becomes clearer, a place where freedom begins. That is why smart people stop chasing validation. Not because they stop valuing people, but because they finally discover something more reliable than approval: themselves.